Welcome to the Hancock-Clarke House. The house was built in 1737 and was home to both of Lexington's 18th century ministers, Reverend John Hancock Sr. and Reverend Jonas Clarke. Everything you will see in the house is from the 18th century and very fragile, so we ask that you do not touch or sit on anything. As you will learn, this house was very involved in the events of April 19, 1775, when the Patriots John Hancock and Samuel Adams were staying here and were alerted to the British military activity in the area by Paul Revere and William Dawes on their famous midnight rides. Now we will enter the house. You are welcome to take photos, but no flash and no video. Welcome to the keeping room. Keeping is an old term we no longer use, which probably meant living. The paintings are of the first owner of the house, Reverend John Hancock I, and his wife, Elizabeth. Reverend Hancock was the minister here from 1699 to 1752. The Hancocks had 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls. 2 of the boys became ministers like their father, but one, Thomas, went into business in Boston. Thomas made a fortune as a merchant and landowner, and by 1735 was one of the richest men in Massachusetts. That year, he built himself a big house on Beacon Hill in Boston. Then, in 1737, he helped his parents by building this lovely Georgian-style mansion for them. Sadly, 2 years later, after they moved from their old tiny house into this big house, there was a family tragedy. Their eldest son, John II, died from an illness. His wife and 3 small children had no money and nowhere to live, so they moved in with their grandparents. Within a few months, Thomas and his wife Lydia, who had no children of their own, offered to raise their 7-year-old nephew John III in Boston. Thus, the very lucky child John got to grow up in his uncle Thomas's mansion and trained to inherit Thomas's business. Of course, this lucky little boy is the patriot John Hancock, whose large signature on the Declaration of Independence is a favorite American story. John became rich and famous thanks to his uncle Thomas and Aunt Lydia. In 1752, the grandfather, the elderly minister John I, passed away and left his elderly wife Elizabeth here to run the large home and their 40 acres of land that had to be farmed. Elizabeth had one slave, Dinah, to help her. The Hancocks had owned at least 2 slaves over the years, Dinah and Jack. While Dinah and Jack both attended Reverend Hancock's funeral, Jack disappeared from the record shortly after that, and we do not know what happened to him. Slavery was a part of the culture and economic life in the North, and we know of at least a dozen slaves in Lexington during this period, but we will talk more about that later. Because the house and farm were too much work for the elderly Elizabeth and Dinah to handle alone, Elizabeth's teenage granddaughter, Lucy Bowes, moved in to help. When Lexington hired a new minister, the 25-year-old Reverend Jonas Clarke, Elizabeth invited him to move in and pay his board by working on the farm, which he gladly accepted. It didn't take long for Reverend Clarke and Lucy Bowes to fall in love, and they were married in 1757. The Clarkes had a long and happy marriage and 12 children. When Elizabeth Hancock passed away in 1760, Thomas sold the house to his niece Lucy and her husband Jonas Clarke, who already had small children. We believe Elizabeth freed Dinah in her will, but Dinah seems to have stayed with the Clarkes, possibly because she didn't have anywhere else to go. It is a sad fact that while the white population talks more and more of freedom, the slaves are trapped by the laws and rules of the slavery system. We believe that in March 1775, 15 years after Elizabeth passed away, Dinah was freed by sending her to Lucy's uncle, the Reverend Jonathan Bowman, who helped older slaves. On his death, she moved to live with his son, Lucy's cousin, in Maine. During this time in Boston, John Hancock became the richest man in Massachusetts and became more and more involved in a group called the Sons of Liberty, who were working for freedom from England. He often used his money to help them buy guns and other supplies. At the same time in Lexington, Reverend Clarke was very political in his Sunday sermons with calls for liberty, saying they were slaves to England. In 1775, John Hancock was chosen to be the president of the Provincial Congress, the meeting of all the towns in the colony. They scheduled weeks of meetings in April in Concord. John Hancock and fellow patriot Sam Adams needed to attend. Where would they stay? At John Hancock's cousin Lucy Clark's house, of course. When Hancock and Adams arrived, they brought with them John's fiancée, Dolly Quincy, and his adoptive mother, Aunt Lydia Hancock. Lydia had several slaves, so one or more might have come too. Somehow, there is space for everyone along with Lucy and Jonas Clark and the 9 Clark children who were in the house. They do not know what will soon happen. As we leave this room, notice a table, which may have belonged to the family. Also, the window shutters are original, and the wall swatch shows what the wallpaper looked like. Here we are in the kitchen, and this is the actual table the Clarks used for family meals. Life for women was very hard. A married woman could not own anything, it all had to be in her husband's name. But she worked from dawn to late at night with only Sunday to rest. The congregation would have expected Reverend Clark to use most of his time preparing his 90-minute sermons and serving their needs, so he probably wouldn't help with the woman's work. Women had no role or vote in the political or economic life of the town. Their job was to have babies and keep nice homes. They loudly supported liberty from England, but probably didn't expect freedom to change their position in life. Besides the usual household chores of cooking and cleaning, these women maintained large vegetable and herb gardens, apple or pear trees, milked cows, cared for pigs, chickens, and maybe goats or geese. They had underground root cellars which they filled with brined or pickled vegetables and smoked meats to last the winter when there was no fresh food. They churned butter, they made jams and jellies, they made all of their own clothes from wool or linen, they made candles out of animal fat or beeswax. In this home, the first lady of the house, Elizabeth Hancock, had at least 2 slaves to help her. Jack and Dinah did all the hard or dirty jobs Elizabeth didn't like to do herself. Also, Jack would have helped in the fields growing the wheat, corn, oats, flax, and whatever else they grew. Elizabeth was in her 50s when they moved into the house, so probably depended on the slaves to do many things. Although we think Dinah continued to live in the house when Lucy became the lady of the house, we believe she mostly helped with the children, who arrived regularly as the family grew. Lucy would have expected Dinah and the children to help plant and harvest the garden, since her vegetables were crucial for the family's survival. Children were expected to help with family chores from a very young age. As we look around the room, I want to point out a few things that belong to the family. These pewter plates belong to the Hancocks. This plate is engraved. It was a wedding gift to the Clarks when they were married in 1757. Over there is the staircase to the children's room above the kitchen. This is how they bought sugar. It came in these cone shapes because it was easier to ship that way. You would have a special tool to pinch off just what you needed. Sugar is very expensive, so you didn't want to waste it. Most cooking was done with honey or molasses, which was cheaper. The blanket roll on the floor represents how the slaves might have slept on blankets or mats near the fire at night. This is called a roasting jack. It is a modern convenience in 1775 and is not original to this house. It works like a grandfather clock. You pull the weights, which turns the chain, which then turns the spit. So you can rotisserie a chicken without standing over a hot fire. All you do is remember to pull the weight every 20 minutes or so, and it cooks by itself. Now we will walk past the butter churn into the next room. Imagine the muscles you would have in your arms from churning butter daily. Small parlor. We will quickly pass through this tiny room since we don't know exactly how it was used. It may have been additional workspace for Lucy to do her sewing or quilting. We aren't sure. But please note the wallpaper, which is an exact copy of a colonial wallpaper. Hancock-Adams room. As you look around this room, you can see how beautiful it is. When the house was built, it probably was a formal parlor, but when needed, the Clarks used it as a guest bedroom. So this is where John Hancock and Samuel Adams were sleeping. This is the actual table they would take their supper on when they returned from their meetings. Someone marked it many years ago to be sure it was saved. This is Reverend Clark's favorite chair. And this mirror was John Hancock's gift to the Clarks for their wedding in 1757. On the wall over there is a swatch that shows the wallpaper in 1775. As we got closer to April 19th, the political situation in Massachusetts was very tense. Paul Revere visited on the 16th to tell the two patriots that a British march to capture the guns being collected in Concord might happen soon. He also told them that there was a rumor that the British wanted to capture John Hancock and charge him for treason. As a result, the Lexington militia had 6 men guarding the house. All seemed normal when the family went to bed on the night of April 18th, but around midnight their sleep was interrupted by the arrival of Paul Revere. The militia guards tried to send him away, but he started yelling that the British were on the way, and everyone quickly woke up. Moments later, William Dawes arrived. Both riders were sent to warn Hancock and Adams in Lexington using different roads to make sure one would get to this house. The 2 men urged Hancock and Adams to leave for a hiding place that had been arranged for them in Woburn. Hancock did not want to leave, he wanted to fight. After a discussion where they urged Hancock to go to safety, Revere and Dawes decided to ride to Concord and left the house. They rode to Concord with Dr. Samuel Prescott, the doctor of Concord, who they met on the road as they left Lexington. The 3 were stopped by a British patrol on the road. Dawes jumped off his horse and hid in the dark woods. Prescott spurred his horse and galloped to Concord to warn the town. Revere was captured. He tried to frighten the British lieutenant in charge of the patrol by saying thousands of militiamen would soon arrive to crush the troops coming out of Boston. The lieutenant decided to go back to Lexington to alert the oncoming column of soldiers that there might be danger ahead. When they reached Lexington, he freed Revere, but kept his horse. Revere came back to the house. He was surprised to find that Hancock and Adams had not left for safety and urged them to leave. They could hear the British drums coming closer to the town when they finally left in Hancock's carriage. Revere then went over to the Buckman Tavern where he helped remove the trunk of Hancock's important papers, which had been stored there, and carry it to safety some miles away. Dolly Quincy Room. This is the main bedroom where John Hancock's fiancée, Dolly Quincy, and his Aunt Lydia Hancock stayed. Lydia was in her 80s, not well, and quite frail, but both women came with Hancock for safety reasons because Boston had become a dangerous place for Patriot leaders and their families. Lydia may have brought slaves with her, who likely would have slept on the floor at the foot of the bed. These beautiful bed curtains and bedspread are not original to the house, but were made during the Revolution by a woman named Rachel Gould. She did the entire set from scratch. It took her 8 years to finish. Also, the ribbon-backed Chippendale chair is believed to be the gift that John Hancock gave to the Clark's daughter Mary when she was married. We have the memories of Dolly Quincy and the Clark's 12-year-old daughter Betty, who tell us what happened in the house after Revere and Dawes arrived at midnight. They said that Aunt Lydia tried hard to help Lucy dress all the crying, tired children, but she was very distressed and cried a lot, so she wasn't much help. Dolly helped Reverend Clark hide all the family money and valuables by burying them in the garden and in the potato bin. They believed that the British would come to the house to find John Hancock and would ransack the house looking to fill their pockets with loot. As morning approached, workmen arrived from Reverend Clark's father's farm about 20 miles away. They took all of the children except 14-year-old Jonas, Betty, and the infant Sally, who would not leave Lucy. When the British arrived on the green, the upstairs windows gave the family and slaves a clear view of the battle. They were frightened when they watched the Lexington militiamen fall, 10 wounded and 8 dead. After the British left, Reverend Clark took Jonas and Betty with him to the green. They sent some of the wounded men to the house where Lucy and Dolly bandaged their wounds. In the afternoon, after all the fighting had ended in Lexington, John Hancock's carriage returned to take Dolly and Lydia to the home of friends in Woburn. 2 days later, they were sent to the home of a family friend in Fairfield, Connecticut. John Hancock followed them there 2 months later. He and Dolly were married. Sadly, Lydia died there around the same time. Dolly said it took 3 years before she and John came back to Massachusetts. Dolly Quincy was known as a very strong, beautiful, and intelligent woman who was very much John's equal. Like other rich white women, she worked hard for the cause of freedom from England. They boycotted English goods, made and wore homespun clothes rather than buy English clothing, and signed petitions. Yet Dolly and the others could not vote or participate in town meeting, and could not have expected to gain much personal freedom from independence in the man's world of the 18th century. Reverend Clarke's study. This room was Reverend Clarke's office. As the minister of Lexington, which had about 700 residents, he would have needed this space to write his sermons, hold meetings, counsel parishioners, and tutor young men studying for the ministry. He was a very outspoken believer in independence from England and sermonized about it often. Possibly because of him, Lexington was a strongly patriot town. There is no record of anyone in Lexington being a loyalist to the king. He was probably very much involved in political discussions with Hancock and Adams while they visited. In the 1700s, we did not yet have separation of church and state, which was created in our Constitution in 1791. Reverend Clarke was both the spiritual and political leader of the town. He made over 3,000 Sunday sermons while in Lexington, and many were very political. As we see in his diary, on April 19th, he carefully reported a summary and the casualties of the day's fighting. There is no evidence that he owned slaves, but he never spoke or wrote about it, so we don't know how he felt. Lucy's stepfather, Reverend Samuel Cook, was a leader of the anti-slave movement in this period. So we assume Reverend Clarke kept family peace by letting Reverend Cook speak for them all. This is his actual desk. It is a desk you stand at to write. The silhouette is our only picture of Reverend Clarke. It was done by one of his sons. Over here in the wall, you can see shoes. We found the shoes in the wall during the house restoration in 2008. During the 17th century, many people put shoes in the wall of a new house to give the family good luck and to ward off evil spirits. Children's bedrooms. Boys and girls would be separated. Luckily for the Clarkes, they had an almost equal number of each, so sleeping arrangements worked out nicely. During the Hancock period, Jack and Dinah may have done their work and slept here. Closing. This is the end of the tour. Before you leave, we urge you to spend a few minutes in the reception room learning more about Jack and Dinah and the several families of free black people who lived in Lexington in the 1700s. You may find some surprising information there, and the guides are happy to answer all questions. Also, please look at the history of the house itself on the opposite wall. It was supposed to be torn down in the 1890s, but was rescued by the Historical Society and moved to a safer location until 1974.